Captain Quibble was having one of those days where the universe seemed to mock the very idea of competence. The lights on the bridge of the asteroid mining colony flickered like a preteen at a disco. It was supposed to be routine. Just another day in the cosmic dustbin known as Sector 12B. But of course, routine was the universe's way of setting you up for failure. "Quibble, you need to see this," crackled a voice over the intercom. It was Crank, the ship's mechanic and a man who could make pessimism look like eternal sunshine. "What now, Crank?" Quibble sighed, imagining a new array of colorful expletives to hurl at the inevitable bucket of bolts failure that awaited. "It's better if you just get down here," Crank replied, the line hissing with static and anxiety. Quibble dragged himself out of his equally flickering chair, which had more duct tape than original fabric. "If it's another one of those ancient alien artifacts you think you found, I swear, Crank, I'll—" "Just get down here," Crank insisted, with all the urgency of a man who'd seen a ghost, or worse, an engineer. Quibble stomped his way down the corridor, past the crew quarters where everyone was either asleep or pretending to be. He couldn't blame them. Life on an asteroid was about as thrilling as watching paint dry, but with the added bonus of imminent death. When he reached the excavation site, Crank was already there, crouched over a shimmering mass half buried in the rock. "I think it might actually be something this time," he said, looking up with eyes that were too hopeful for someone who usually treated optimism like a disease. "What are we looking at?" Quibble asked, squinting at the thing like it might be a holographic tax audit. "Something old," Crank replied, his voice reverent for possibly the first time in his life. Quibble took a closer look. It wasn't much to behold, just a metal box with some alien runes etched in a language that seemed to have more vowels than a Welsh phone book. "Great, another bit of junk," Quibble grunted. "Maybe the aliens left us a toaster." Crank shook his head. "No, Cap, this isn't junk. I ran some preliminary scans and it's emitting temporal frequencies." "Temporal frequencies?" Quibble raised an eyebrow. "Like time travel." "Yeah, and look here," Crank pointed to a small panel on the side of the box. "I think it's a control panel." Quibble frowned. "And let me guess, you want to press the big shiny button that says do not press." Crank grinned, the kind of grin that promised a new disaster or a Nobel Prize. "Exactly." Quibble sighed, running a hand through what was left of his hair. "All right, let's push it. But if we end up as prehistoric fish food, I'm taking it out of your paycheck." Crank laughed, his fingers already dancing on the panel. "What's life without a little risk?" The device hummed to life with a sound that could only be described as cosmic indigestion. Lights flashed, the air crackled, and Quibble suddenly felt like he'd just been electrocuted by a god in training. "Well, that's new," Crank said, awed. New was one way to describe the fact that the room seemed to have shifted, like they'd moved a million miles in the blink of an eye, or maybe it was just the hangover kicking in. Just then, the door slid open, revealing Fliss, the ship's communications officer and self-appointed bringer of bad news. "Captain, are you seeing this?" Quibble turned to face her, trying to look like he had a clue. "Seeing what, Fliss?" "The sky," she said, her voice tinged with something between wonder and terror. "It's different." "Different how?" Quibble asked, dreading the answer. Fliss pointed up. "There are stars where there shouldn't be stars, and planets. They're all in the wrong places." Crank scratched his head. "So what, we just moved in time, or someone moved us," Quibble muttered, his mind racing with possibilities each more terrifying than the last. Fliss bit her lip. "I think we just stumbled into something big." "Big," Quibble echoed. "I was hoping for mildly interesting." "This is beyond interesting," Fliss declared, her eyes alight with excitement. "We've found a chronodile artifact." Quibble groaned. "Chronodiles? Aren't those the crazy space reptiles that went extinct because they tried to rewrite time and ended up erasing themselves?" "Exactly," Fliss confirmed, her grin wide and perhaps a little bit mad. "And now we have one of their devices." Quibble shook his head, his shoulders sagging with the weight of 1,000 potential catastrophes. "Well, isn't that just dandy?" Crank chuckled. "Looks like we've got a time machine, boss." "Great," Quibble said, half sarcastic, half resigned. Now we can make sure we never took this job in the first place. Fliss laughed, a sound that was equal parts amusement and impending doom. Or we can fix everything that's ever gone wrong in history. Or, Quibble said, cutting in with the sharpness of a seasoned pessimist, we could screw up so badly that the universe decides to finally put us out of our misery. Crank shrugged. Well, at least it's something to do. Quibble nodded, knowing full well that in their line of work something to do was often a euphemism for something to regret. They stood there, the three of them, staring at the artifact like it might jump up and start dancing. It didn't, of course. That would have been too straightforward. So, what's the plan, Cap? Fliss asked, still buzzing with the thrill of discovery. Quibble sighed. We figure out how to use this thing without turning into cosmic roadkill. Crank cracked his knuckles. I'll get started on deciphering the runes, and I'll make sure the rest of the crew doesn't start a cult around it, Fliss added with a smirk. Good, Quibble said, clapping his hands together. Let's make sure this doesn't end up on the list of top 10 reasons humanity got wiped out. They dispersed, each lost in thought about the artifact that could potentially rewrite the history of the universe, or just as likely, their lives. Captain Quibble, for better or worse, had a feeling that things were about to get a lot more interesting. As he walked back to his quarters, Quibble couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just opened a door to a whole new level of chaos. And knowing his luck, it was the kind of chaos that came with a side of destruction and a dessert of regret. But then again, what else was new? He chuckled to himself, a low, rumbling sound that echoed in the empty corridor. Time travel, he muttered, shaking his head. Because plain old space travel just wasn't enough trouble. With a final glance back at the site, where the artifact glinted with a promise of untold adventures and disasters, Quibble grinned. Here's to unintended consequences. And with that, he stepped into his quarters, ready to face whatever new madness awaited them in the shifting sands of time. Captain Quibble had barely reached his quarters when the intercom screeched back to life with the enthusiasm of a rabid squirrel. Cap, you better get back here. We've got a situation, Crank's voice crackled, sounding like he was halfway through a mental breakdown or a particularly bad joke. What now, Crank? Quibble groaned, rubbing the bridge of his nose with the resignation of a man who knew the universe was a cosmic comedian with him as the punchline. Remember that time travel doohickey we poked at? Yeah, the one that made our sky look like it's drunk. That's the one. It just activated something, Crank said, his voice teetering between fascination and impending doom. And by something, I mean about a dozen very angry, very alive chronodiles. Quibble's heart skipped a beat. Chronodiles? You mean those time-twisting, nightmare-fuel reptiles we've all heard about? The very same. And they look like they are about to rewrite our existence off the galactic map. Right, Quibble muttered, because why wouldn't the universe send us a pack of prehistoric reptiles with a penchant for time travel? I'll be right there. He sprinted down the hallway, the metal floors clanging beneath his boots like a death march. As he entered the control room, he was greeted by a scene that looked like a New Year's Eve party gone wrong. The chronodiles were there, all right. Tall, scaly, and wearing expressions that could curdle milk. Crank stood off to the side, looking like a kid who'd just realized his science project might blow up the school. I tried to say hello, he shrugged. They didn't seem to appreciate it. Quibble watched as one of the chronodiles, a particularly grizzled specimen who looked like he could gargle nails, started speaking in a language that sounded like a blender full of rocks. Miraculously, the ship's translation software kicked in, turning the cacophony into something marginally comprehensible. Humans, the alien hissed, voice low and full of venom. You've stumbled upon our relic. This is your doom. Quibble, never one to be cowed by a threat, even from a creature that could bend time, crossed his arms. Well, it's not like we found your secret recipe for lizard stew. Why so grumpy? The chronodile sneered, showing off a row of teeth that made Quibble grateful he wasn't on the wrong end of them. You tampered with our device. Our mission is to erase the greatest achievements of humanity. Your existence is a blight. Crank raised an eyebrow. Greatest achievements, huh? Good luck finding any of those on this rock. Fliss, who'd been lurking in the background with her finger hovering over the runaway button, chimed in. So, you're planning to mess up our timeline? Precisely, the Chronodile growled. Your technological progress, your history, your very identity will be undone, Quibble sighed, turning to his crew. I knew today was going too well, Fliss smirked. Good thing we've never actually done anything worth remembering. The Chronodile leader, clearly not a fan of self-deprecating humor, slammed his tail against the floor, making the room vibrate. Silence. Your kind has meddled in affairs beyond your comprehension, Crank shrugged. Hey, we've been doing that since we climbed out of the primordial soup. It's kind of our thing. Quibble decided it was time to cut to the chase. All right, Scaly, you've already made it clear you're here to ruin our day. But why now? Why us? The Chronodile's eyes glinted with malice. You have the artifact. It is the key to our plan. With it, we can travel to any point in your history and unmake the events that led to your current civilization. Fliss snorted. Joke's on you. Most of our civilization is already unmade. Quibble considered the situation. They were outnumbered, outclassed, and quite possibly out of their minds. But they had one thing going for them: humanity's stubborn refusal to go quietly into the night or any other temporal anomaly. All right, team, Quibble said, lowering his voice so the Chronodiles wouldn't hear. We need to figure out how to stop these overgrown geckos from turning history into their personal sandbox. Crank looked at the control panel of the artifact, the alien runes blinking like a foreign language version of Simon Says. Maybe we can reverse engineer it, use their own technology against them. Great idea, Fliss replied, sarcasm dripping from her words. Why don't we just ask them for their user manual while we're at it? The Chronodile leader seemed to sense the shift in the room, narrowing his eyes at Quibble. You plot against us, human. Quibble smiled, all teeth and no warmth. Plotting us? Never. We're just admiring your choice in ancient relics. You got it on eBay, the alien hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure cooker. Foolish, Quibble turned back to his crew. Fliss, see if you can keep them talking. Crank, work your magic on that panel. I'll try not to get eaten alive. Fliss nodded, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how expendable they were. So, what's it like being a time-traveling lizard? Do you get dental with that? Quibble watched as Crank began fiddling with the alien device, his fingers moving with the skill of a man who'd spent far too much time trying to get stubborn machines to behave. This might take a minute, Crank muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The Chronodile leader, clearly fed up with small talk, growled, Enough stalling. Surrender the artifact. Quibble snorted. You really think we're just going to hand over the keys to our own extinction? The alien sneered. You have no choice. Actually, we do, Quibble said, heart pounding as he took a step closer to the Chronodile. We can fight, or at least make your job a real pain in the tail. Crank's fingers danced over the panel, deciphering the runes with the kind of desperation usually reserved for defusing a bomb with a second left on the timer. Got it, he whispered. I think I can activate a feedback loop. Fliss shot him a look. Is that good or bad? Well, Crank said, grinning like a lunatic. It's bad for them. Do it, Quibble ordered, stepping back as the Chronodiles began to realize something was up. The artifact pulsed with energy, the room filling with a sound that could only be described as the universe clearing its throat. The Chronodiles hissed in alarm, their leader roaring in frustration as the device glowed brighter. What's happening? Fliss asked, shielding her eyes from the blinding light. Crank grinned wildly. We've turned their own weapon against them. It's going to send them back to wherever or whenever they came from. The Chronodile leader's eyes widened with fury, but before he could react, the artifact surged with power. One by one, the Chronodiles flickered, their forms becoming indistinct, as if reality itself was erasing them. Quibble watched, heart hammering in his chest, as the last of the Chronodiles vanished with a final, ear-splitting crack. The room fell silent, the artifact's glow fading to nothing. Well, Fliss said, breaking the quiet with a shaky laugh. That was anticlimactic. Quibble let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I don't know about you, but I could use a drink. Crank wiped his brow, looking as if he'd stared down the barrel of a particularly angry fate. I think I'll join you, Cap. They stood together, the artifact now nothing more than a relic of a battle narrowly avoided. Quibble glanced at his crew, taking comfort in their resilience, their irreverence. Good work, team. But let's make a pact. From now on, we leave the ancient alien artifacts alone, Fliss snorted, and miss out on all this fun. Exactly, Quibble said dryly. Wouldn't want to make life too easy. With a shared laugh, they left the control room behind, stepping back into the corridors of their asteroid mining colony, still very much in Sector 12B, but with a newfound appreciation for the chaos they called life in space. As they walked, Quibble couldn't help but think they might just survive this cosmic joke after all. Quibble sat in the mess hall, staring into the depths of his coffee cup like it held all the answers to the universe's darkest jokes. It didn't, of course. Just a reflection of his own haggard face staring back at him. Why do I get the feeling we're not done with those time-traveling lizards? He muttered. Because, said Flibber, plonking down beside him with all the grace of a collapsing star. When has anything ever been simple on this rock? Flibber was the ship's engineer, an enthusiastic tinkerer with a propensity for making things either work spectacularly or explode in a rather colorful fashion. Heard Crank's been mucking about with that chronodile gizmo, Flibber continued, eyes wide with the gleam of impending chaos. Best guess. He's going to need some help figuring out which end is up before he accidentally turns us all into tadpoles, Quibble groaned. Great. Just when I thought we could breathe easy. Relax, Cap, Flibber grinned. If we screw it up, we'll just be temporarily extinct. Dr. Fern sidled up to the table, carrying a plant that looked suspiciously like it might eat small rodents. I brought this, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, in case we need to feed any unwanted guests. Quibble raised an eyebrow. Your plants can eat chronodiles now, Fern shrugged. They're a work in progress, like everything else around here. Quibble decided now was as good a time as any to get the plan rolling. All right, crew, we need to figure out how to sabotage that alien tech. Suggestions? Well, Fern drawled. Assuming we can't just feed it to the plants, maybe we could use the colony's power grid to overload the artifact, short-circuit the thing. Except, Flibber interjected, if we fry the power grid, we'll be left with nothing but candlelight dinners and sad accordion music. Quibble nodded. Fine. Let's not blow our only source of electricity. What else? Flibber tapped the table thoughtfully. We could try syncing the artifact with our comm systems. Maybe broadcast a temporal interference signal might be enough to throw them off. Great idea, Quibble said. And how exactly do we do that? Your guess is as good as mine, Flibber snorted. I'm an engineer, not a temporal physicist. Crank entered the room then, looking more frazzled than a cat in a thunderstorm. Tried to make sense of that gizmo, he said, dropping into a chair. Got it to hum a little, then it spat sparks at me. Not sure if that's a good sign. Maybe it's trying to communicate, Fern suggested. Sure, Crank replied. And maybe it just wants to watch the world burn. That's the spirit, Quibble said. Let's head over to the lab and see if we can figure this out before it decides to rewrite the last 30 minutes of our lives. The lab was cluttered, a veritable smorgasbord of wires, tools, and gadgets that looked like they'd been harvested from a tech junkyard. In the center of the chaos sat the chronodile artifact, a menacing hunk of alien tech with a blinking panel that seemed to mock them with every flash. Right, Quibble said, clapping his hands together. Let's see what we're dealing with. Flibber and Crank moved to the artifact, poking at it like it might bite, which, given recent events, wasn't entirely outside the realm of possibility. So what have we tried so far? Quibble asked. Crank grimaced. Well, I flipped this switch, followed by a string of curses, and then pulled that lever. Nothing but sparks and a headache. Flibber leaned in, peering at the rig like it might hold a secret it was dying to spill. Maybe we're looking at this all wrong. Could be it needs a specific input, a trigger from something we haven't considered. Like what? Quibble asked. Like a specific frequency, Fern said, her voice tinged with curiosity. What if it reacts to sound? Or maybe it needs a particular kind of radiation. Radiation, you say? Crank smirked. We've got plenty of that to go around. Flibber scratched his head. Radiation's a good shout. We could try aligning it with the old signal boosters. Maybe transmit some background cosmic noise and see what happens. Quibble nodded. Sounds like a plan. Let's give it a go and hope we don't accidentally summon their entire species for a family reunion. As the crew set to work, the room filled with a symphony of clattering metal, the occasional curse and Flibber's tuneless whistling that was less melodic and more akin to a dying droid. After several minutes and a few minor electrocutions, Flibber grunted with satisfaction. There, rerouted the signal booster. We can try bouncing some random frequencies off this baby, see if anything sticks. Great, Quibble said. Let's start with something low and work our way up. We'll keep an eye out for any changes. The artifact sat there, resolute and unmoving as they dialed in frequencies, watching for any sign of life. It wasn't until Flibber hit a particularly high setting that the device shuddered, letting out a noise like a cat being stepped on. Did that do anything? Crank asked, peering over Flibber's shoulder like he expected the thing to jump up and start dancing. Well, it's making a noise, Fern said dryly. That's a start. Quibble leaned in closer, watching the lights on the artifact flicker. It's responding, but it's not opening a portal or anything. Maybe it's just confused. Join the club, Flibber muttered, adjusting the dials again. Let's try another frequency. Maybe we can confuse it into compliance. With each adjustment, the artifact reacted with varying degrees of enthusiasm, from flickering to small jolts of electricity that made them jump back. Several attempts later, it let out a low hum, glowing faintly. Now we're talking, Crank grinned. Think we've got it, or we're about to blow a hole in the fabric of time, Fern suggested cheerfully. Same difference, Flibber said, stepping back. If it's glowing, that means we've tapped into something it likes. Question is, how do we use it? Quibble scratched his chin, eyeing the artifact with a mix of trepidation and stubborn resolve. If we can manipulate it, maybe we can use it to send the chronodials a nice little message. Something along the lines of stay the hell away. Crank chuckled. A cosmic restraining order. I like it. But we still don't know how it really works, Fern pointed out. We could accidentally invite them back for another visit, Quibble sighed. Anyone got a better idea? Silence fell, the crew exchanging glances as if waiting for someone else to jump off the deep end first. Finally, Flibber shrugged. We're in uncharted territory here, Cap. Could be anything we do is a gamble. Yeah, Quibble agreed. But it's a gamble we have to take. Sometimes you have to roll the dice and hope for snake eyes. Right then, Flibber said, his voice tinged with determination. Let's see what this thing can do. They set to work, adjusting dials, rerouting cables, and whispering encouragement to the artifact as if it were a particularly stubborn pet. The atmosphere was tense, each beep and whir of the machine another step closer to either victory or disaster. Finally, Flibber hit a combination that made the artifact shudder, emitting a sound like a chorus of disgruntled geese. The lights flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows across the room. Well, that's new, Crank said, squinting at the panel. What's it doing? Quibble asked, leaning over to get a better look. Flibber adjusted one last dial and the artifact let out a low, resonating hum. I think we've got it. Looks like it's broadcasting some kind of signal. A signal to who? Fern asked, her voice skeptical. Hopefully not the chronodials, Quibble replied, though the doubt in his voice was hard to miss. As they watched, the artifact continued its low drone, the lights stabilizing to a steady glow. It seemed for now that they had succeeded in doing something. Whether that something was good or bad remained to be seen. Well, I think we've done all we can, Flibber said, stepping back with a resigned sigh. Quibble nodded. Right. Now we wait and see if we've managed to turn the tide or just made everything worse. They lingered in the lab, the artifact humming softly in the background like an ominous lullaby. Quibble felt a strange mix of hope and dread churning in his gut. the weight of their chances hanging heavily in the air. "Think it'll work?" Crank asked, breaking the silence. Quibble shrugged, trying to summon a confidence he didn't quite feel. "If it doesn't, we're no worse off than before." "That's one way to look at it," Fern said, crossing her arms. "Let's just hope the big lizards don't take offense to our little experiment." Flibber grinned. "If they do, we can just blame it on bad reception." Quibble chuckled, appreciating the levity amid the tension. "All right, let's keep our fingers crossed and try not to blow anything up in the meantime." They drifted out of the lab, leaving the artifact to its strange machinations. As they walked, Quibble couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was holding its breath, waiting to see what they'd unleashed with their meddling. But then meddling was what humans did best, and if they were lucky, maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to tip the scales in their favor. The silence in the ship's mess hall was as thick as the soup of the day, which, judging by the smell, was something between unidentified green and possibly edible. Captain Quibble stared at his not-quite-nutritious meal with a look of grim acceptance. It wasn't the worst thing he'd faced today. No, that honor belonged to the Chronodile artifact, the perpetual thorn in his side. Crank slunk in, looking like he'd just spent a cozy night in a blender. "Hey Cap, you know how you said we're no worse off than before? Well, I think you jinxed it. Fantastic." "What's gone wrong now?" Quibble asked, with all the enthusiasm of a man about to walk through a scalding asteroid shower without a suit. Crank plonked himself opposite Quibble, stealing a spoonful of the captain's soup. "So, we might have accidentally broadcasted a come hither to every Chronodile in the quadrant. They're showing up like it's a cosmic garage sale." A dry laugh escaped Quibble. "Because obviously things weren't complicated enough already. How many are we talking? More than a handful?" "Less than a funeral procession," Crank replied with a grimace. "Well, as long as it's not a swarm the size of Jupiter, we might survive the day." Quibble stood up, abandoning his meal for the dubious comfort of the control room. Flibber, already present, was hunched over the main console, muttering sweet nothings to the ship. "Hey Cap, heard the good news. Hard to miss it when it's staring you down with time-twisting fangs," Quibble replied. "Any sign of what their new toys can do?" Flibber gestured at the radar screen, which was beginning to resemble a Christmas tree from hell. "Looks like they've got some shiny new tech. Probably more advanced than our latest jury-rigged mess," Quibble groaned. "Great. We're about to get outgunned by lizards with laser pointers." Fern strolled in, late to the misery party. "Did I miss the part where we all pretend to have a plan?" "We were just getting to the pretending," Quibble replied. "Ideas. Can't feed them to the plants, I suppose," Fern mused as she took a seat. "Though in a pinch, I could always try some aggressive pruning." Crank leaned against the console, chewing on what was left of a biscuit. "Should have known the Chronodiles wouldn't just pack up and leave quietly. They're like relatives who insist on staying through the holiday." Flibber snorted. "Yeah, only these relatives come with the ability to rewrite time. Makes your average family spat look downright civilized." Quibble rubbed his temples, feeling the dull throb of impending catastrophe. "All right, crew. We need to be unpredictable. Show them what makes humans the most annoying species in the galaxy." "Annoying is our specialty," Fern said with a smirk. "What do you have in mind, Cap?" Quibble considered the options, none particularly appealing. "We've got to outsmart them. Use our chaotic nature to our advantage. They expect us to play by the book. We need to throw the book out the airlock." Crank chuckled. "Finally, a use for all those health and safety manuals." Flibber tapped the console thoughtfully. "We could try improvising with the tech we've got. Maybe set up some kind of distraction. We've got those old hologram projectors. We could rig them to make it look like we've got more firepower than we do." "Smoke and mirrors," Quibble nodded. "Sounds just crazy enough to work." Fern raised an eyebrow. "And when that fails, we fall back on Plan B." "Panic," Quibble replied, deadpan. "Solid plan, Cap." Crank clapped him on the back. "Let's get to it then." The crew dispersed, each moving to their respective tasks with the resigned determination of a group of people who knew exactly how deep in the galactic muck they were. Flibber dove into the piles of outdated tech, dragging out the dusty, clunky hologram projectors that had spent the last few years collecting rust and mockery in equal measure. "Think these things will actually work?" Crank asked, holding one up and giving it a cautious shake. "Depends on your definition of work," Flibber replied. "If you mean flicker and potentially explode, then absolutely." Fern returned with a handful of cables and a mischievous gleam in her eye. "Let's rig these babies up. Might not fool the Chronodiles for long, but it'll make them think twice." Quibble watched his crew scurry around, feeling a strange sense of pride amid the chaos. They were a ragtag bunch, more likely to cause an intergalactic incident than prevent one, but they were his ragtag bunch. If anyone could pull this off, it was them. As the holograms flickered to life, projecting an impressive, if slightly glitchy, armada around the ship, Quibble couldn't help but let out a small sigh of relief. "At least they'll hesitate before they incinerate us," he said, voice laced with hopeful cynicism. The ship shuddered as a low rumble resonated through its hull, the Chronodile's arrival making itself known not with a bang, but with a gentle nudge of inevitability. The wretched irony of it all wasn't lost on Quibble. They'd gone from the frying pan into the cosmic fire with remarkable efficiency. The comms crackled to life, and Quibble winced as a voice boomed through, accompanied by the ship's translation software struggling valiantly to keep up. "Humans, your time-manipulating artifact must be relinquished. Resistance is futile," Flibber snorted. "They actually said futile." "I thought only cartoon villains used that word." Quibble leaned into the mic, adopting his most authoritative tone. "Sorry, lizards, but we're fresh out of artifacts to relinquish. How about a deal instead?" There was a pause, and Quibble could almost hear the Chronodiles' collective confusion. "What deal do you propose? That we all pretend none of this ever happened and go our separate ways?" "Think of it as a mutual timeout," Quibble said. Silence. Then laughter, if you could call it that, from the Chronodile's end. "Humans, your humor is unique, but this is not a negotiation." Quibble clapped his hands together, grinning despite himself. "Well, I tried diplomacy. Now we improvise." "Good call, Cap," Crank said, adjusting one of the projectors. "Let's see if we can out-crazy a species that literally bends time." Flibber flicked a few switches, the ship systems humming with new life as they routed power through the makeshift holographic array. "And if not, at least we'll go out with a bang." The ship rocked again, a not-so-gentle reminder that they were still very much in the crosshairs. Quibble gripped the console, trying to ignore the pit in his stomach. If they couldn't bluff their way out of this, it wouldn't matter how clever or snarky they were. "All right, folks," Quibble said, trying to channel some of that bravado he'd lost along the way. "Let's give them a show they won't forget." The next few minutes were a blur of rapid-fire activity, the crew working together with all the grace and precision of a drunken octopus, yet somehow managing to make it work. The holograms danced around the ship, a dazzling display of holographic firepower that, if nothing else, might convince the Chronodiles they were more trouble than they were worth. Crank let out a low whistle as the displays flickered and fizzed. "Not bad, for a bunch of misfit humans." Fern grinned, patting the console fondly. "I knew there was a reason I didn't scrap these old projectors." Quibble watched the radar, heart pounding as the Chronodiles hesitated, their previously steady advance faltering. It wasn't much, but it was something, and sometimes a moment's hesitation was all you needed. "Looks like they're thinking twice," Flibber said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. "Let's hope they think 3 times," Quibble muttered. "Now what now?" Fern said, with a grin that could light up a black hole. "We go on the offensive." Quibble raised an eyebrow. "You volunteering to take a spacewalk with a blaster?" "Not quite. I was thinking we use the Chronodile gizmo against them. See if we can give them a taste of their own medicine," Fern replied. Crank looked intrigued. "You mean flip the script? Use their own tech to give their ships a little time out?" Flibber nodded. "Could work. If we can sync it up with the projectors, we might be able to trick their sensors. Make it seem like we've got the upper hand." Quibble felt a rare spark of hope. "You think it'll work?" The crew exchanged glances, each with varying degrees of confidence and skepticism. Finally, Fern shrugged. "Only one way to find out." "All right then," Quibble said, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders. "Let's roll the dice and see if we can make Lady Luck our ally for once." The crew sprang into action, their movements a chaotic ballet as they adjusted dials, rerouted cables, and exchanged hurried instructions. The chronodile artifact hummed ominously in the background, as if aware that it was about to be used in a way its creators had never intended. As Flibber made the final connections, Quibble couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental or disastrous. "Here goes nothing," he said, holding his breath as Flibber threw the switch. The ship shuddered, the lights flickering as the artifact pulsed with energy, sending a ripple through space. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing had changed. Then the radar lit up with an array of confused signals, the chronodile ships caught in a temporal loop that sent them spiraling into disarray. Crank let out a whoop of triumph. "Looks like we've got them on the ropes." Quibble allowed himself a rare smile, feeling a surge of relief. "Let's not get too cocky. We've still got to get out of here in one piece." Fern nodded, tapping the console. "I'll set a course for the nearest jump point. With any luck, we'll be long gone before they figure out what hit them." Flibber grinned, watching the radar with satisfaction. "I'd say they won't know what's real or fake for a good while yet." Quibble clapped him on the shoulder, feeling a renewed sense of camaraderie. "Good work, everyone. Let's get out of here before the universe decides we're getting too lucky." As the ship powered up for its escape, Quibble took one last look at the chaotic mess they'd left behind, feeling a strange mix of pride and incredulity. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd managed to outwit an alien species that had every advantage they lacked. But as they sped away, leaving the confused chronodiles behind, Quibble knew it was only a matter of time before they faced another challenge. In the grand scheme of things, they were still just a small crew in a vast universe, doing their best to survive against the odds. Still, as Flibber hummed a jaunty tune and Crank regaled them with tales of the close call they'd just had, Quibble couldn't help but feel that, for now at least, they'd given the universe a run for its money. And that, in the end, was all he could ask for. The ship's corridors flickered with the kind of ambient lighting that screamed budget cuts and fire hazard in equal measure. Captain Quibble leaned against the wall of the mess hall, his face a study in grim determination and mild gastrointestinal distress. The chronodiles were messing with time, and it was starting to feel like reality was a toddler with a crayon on a clean wall. Crank skidded into the mess hall, panting like he'd just run a marathon in zero gravity. "Cap, you need to see this. Quick, is it as bad as the time you thought you'd invented instant bacon and accidentally bioengineered a sentient meat product?" Quibble asked, pushing himself off the wall with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for dental visits. "Worse," Crank replied, which was not the reassurance Quibble was hoping for. The pair stumbled into the control room where Flibber was frantically trying to wrestle the main console into submission. The screen showed a dizzying array of timelines, each one more improbable than the last. "All right, someone explain why our reality looks like it got drunk at a multiverse buffet," Quibble said, staring at the chaos. "Chronodiles," Flibber grunted, not looking up from the console. "They're altering key moments in Earth's history. Every change ripples back to us." "Like what?" Quibble asked, feeling dread settle in his stomach like a bad curry. "Well, for starters, Einstein never figured out E equals mc2, so good luck with your relativity," Flibber said. "Oh, and in this timeline the dinosaurs decided to unionize before they got wiped out. Apparently, they were negotiating planetary rights." Quibble pinched the bridge of his nose. "So we've got mathematically challenged physicists and unionized T-Rexes. This just keeps getting better." The ship shuddered violently, and Quibble had to grab the nearest console to keep from toppling over. The chronodiles' meddling was wreaking havoc on their systems, and it felt like they were riding a roller coaster designed by someone with a death wish. Dr. Fern sauntered in, a sarcastic smile playing on her lips even as the ship rocked beneath her feet. "Heard we're having a bit of a timeline crisis. Thought I'd drop by and watch the world implode." "Glad you could make it," Quibble said dryly. "Any advice on how to deal with space-time shenanigans?" "Sure," Fern replied. "I suggest a strong drink and pretending it's all a bad dream." "Noted," Quibble said, watching as another timeline flashed across the screen. This one involved Charles Darwin getting distracted by a particularly interesting species of tree frog and never quite getting around to writing his famous book. The ripple effect had apparently turned the crew's uniforms into retro disco attire. Crank tugged at the paisley shirt now adorning his chest, frowning. "I don't know whether to be horrified or to start dancing." Flibber shot him a look. "You start dancing and I'm spacing you." Quibble ran a hand through his hair. "All right, people, we've got to stop this. We need to find a way to counteract their time meddling before we end up in a reality where fish rule the planet and we're their servants. How do we even begin to fix this mess?" Fern asked, arms crossed as she leaned against the wall with casual indifference. "Good question," Quibble replied, looking around at his crew. "Anyone got a time-traveling manual handy?" Crank raised a hand sheepishly. "I might have something. I mean, it's mostly theoretical, but I've been working on a device that could. Maybe stop temporal fluctuations." "Maybe?" Quibble echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Hey, it's either that or we wait for the Chronodiles to write us out of existence," Crank defended, sounding mildly offended. "All right, let's see it," Quibble sighed, waving a hand. "It's not like we're drowning in options." Crank hurried out of the room and returned with what looked like a sparkly blender with a disco ball attached. "Behold, the temporal stabilizer Mark I." Flibber peered at the contraption. "You sure that thing's not going to turn us into space smoothies?" "Pretty sure," Crank said with confidence that was more bravado than actual assurance. Quibble looked at the blinking lights and whirring gears. "Well, it's ugly and it doesn't inspire confidence, but it's all we've got." Fern shrugged. "Might as well, in for a penny, in for a timeline-defying pound." "All right, Crank," Quibble said, clapping his hands together. "Fire it up. Let's see if we can get our reality back on track." Crank twisted a dial on the stabilizer, the device humming ominously to life. The room was filled with a low hum that set Quibble's teeth on edge, but he couldn't tell if it was the machine or the impending sense of doom. Seconds ticked by, and the screens flickered with shifting realities. Slowly, the chaos began to stabilize, the flickering screens settling into a semblance of the familiar, albeit with a few lingering oddities. A timeline blipped into existence where the phrase "Banana Republic" was taken literally, and fruit held a surprising amount of political power. "Not bad," Flibber commented, adjusting his own paisley sleeve. "We've still got some kinks, but it's better than being erased." Quibble breathed a sigh of relief. "All right, team, keep monitoring those timelines. We've got to keep this thing running until we can figure out how to put a stop to the Chronodiles meddling." The crew nodded, each settling into their tasks with the resigned determination of those who knew they'd just barely dodged a cosmic bullet. Quibble watched them work, a sense of pride mingling with the ever-present anxiety in his gut. The ship lurched again, and Quibble cursed under his breath. "I swear if those lizards don't kill us, this ship will." Flibber chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "At least we'll go out in style." "Yeah," Crank agreed, glancing down at his paisley outfit. "Assuming style includes outdated fashion choices." "I'm sure we can find a timeline where disco is still cool," Fern added, her sarcasm a bomb in the chaos. Quibble let out a laugh despite himself. "Well, I guess the good thing about time being fluid is that we've got all the time in the world to fix this." The crew continued to work, their banter tinged with a dark humor that was their only defense against the insanity swirling around them. As Flibber adjusted the stabilizer and Fern monitored the shifting timelines, Quibble allowed himself to believe that they might just make it through this after all. "Think we'll ever get back to normal?" Crank asked, his voice filled with a rare hint of vulnerability. Quibble looked around at his ragtag team, each one as flawed and resilient as the next. "Normal's overrated," he said. "But whatever happens, we'll handle it. We've come this far, haven't we?" The ship groaned ominously, a reminder that their journey was far from over. But as the crew worked together, each contributing their own brand of chaos and brilliance, Quibble felt a strange sense of peace. Because in a universe where time could twist and turn at the whims of an alien race, where reality could shift with the flick of a lizard's tail, there was something comforting in the knowledge that they were all in it together, facing the unknown with a smile, a snarky comment, and the unwavering determination to survive. As they continued their work, the universe spinning unpredictably around them, Quibble couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to make it through. After all, they'd faced worse odds and come out the other side battered but undefeated. And in the end, that was all anyone in their line of work could ask for. The ship creaked like an old man getting out of bed, each groan and rattle a testament to how close they were to falling apart. Captain Quibble had developed a newfound appreciation for their vessel's stubborn refusal to die, kind of like himself, really. Dr. Fern leaned against the mess hall wall with the kind of practiced indifference that came from years of not giving a damn. "So how are we not dead yet?" she asked, smirking at Quibble like he had all the answers. Quibble shrugged. "Sheer bloody-mindedness," he replied, "and maybe a touch of luck, the kind that usually gets you shot. Crank fiddling with the temporal stabilizer Mark I, an invention that looked more like a reject from a 70s sci-fi show than anything that should be able to save them from temporal doom, piped up. "Hey, I've got an idea, or at least a half-formed thought that might not be entirely stupid." "That's new," Flibber muttered, not looking up from the console where he was desperately trying to keep their reality from unraveling like a cheap sweater. "What's your idea, Crank?" Quibble asked, rubbing his temples as if that could stop the headaches from all this timeline nonsense. "Well," Crank said, looking uncharacteristically serious, "what if we use paradoxes against the chronodials? They're like time bullies, yeah. What if we confuse them with so many contradictions they don't know which way's up?" Fern raised an eyebrow. "Paradoxes, huh? Like the chicken and the egg debate, but with more existential dread." "Exactly," Crank said excitedly. "If we make enough small, nonsensical changes to our timeline, it could throw a spanner in their works, make them second-guess their own meddling." Quibble considered this, his mind racing with possibilities. "It's a long shot, but it might just be crazy enough to work, but we need to keep it small, subtle. We don't want to rewrite our own history by accident. Subtlety's never been our strong suit," Flibber remarked, his fingers flying across the console as if typing could somehow ward off their imminent demise. "Right, team," Quibble said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Let's brainstorm some harmless tweaks we can make, something the chronodials won't immediately notice." "Doctor." Fern tapped her chin thoughtfully. "We could start with something simple, like convincing ancient humans to invent the wheel in a different order, square first, round later." Crank nodded, already jotting down notes on his datapad. "Or what if we make it so umbrellas were used for rain before they were ever used for shade?" "A minor cultural tweak, but enough to create a ripple." "Socks before shoes," Flibber offered with a grin. "Not life-changing, but enough to confuse anyone's morning routine for a century or two." The ideas flowed, each one as absurd as it was potentially effective. They were like kids playing with matches, hoping not to burn the house down but willing to risk it for the thrill. Quibble listened, his nerves settling into a strange calm. They were on the precipice of something potentially disastrous, but at least they were doing something. Anything was better than sitting around waiting for a reptilian reset button. "All right," Quibble said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get cracking on these paradoxes. Crank, you take the lead on implementing these changes. Flibber, keep an eye on any pushback from the timelines. Fern, you're on snack duty. We're going to need all the caffeine and sugar we can get." "Aye, aye, Captain," Fern said with a mock salute, heading off toward the galley with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for watching paint dry. As the crew dispersed to their respective tasks, Quibble lingered in the mess hall for a moment, staring out at the stars. They looked so calm, so unaffected by the chaos they were in. He envied them, those distant suns burning away without a care in the universe. "Hey," Crank said, breaking Quibble out of his reverie. "You think this is going to work?" Quibble sighed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Hell if I know, but when has knowing ever stopped us before?" Crank laughed, a sound more genuine than Quibble had heard in weeks. "Right you are, sir. Let's go confuse some lizards." With their plan in motion, the crew worked like a well-oiled machine, each one contributing to the madness in their own unique way. They were a ragtag bunch, sure, but they were his ragtag bunch, and Quibble wouldn't trade them for anything. Not even for a ship that didn't threaten to explode every other day. Hours passed in a blur, the ship filled with the hum of machinery and the clatter of tools. The temporal stabilizer mark I hummed away in the background, its glow casting strange shadows on the walls. It was like having a disco ball at a funeral, oddly comforting in its own absurd way. Fern returned with a tray full of steaming mugs and a half-hearted attempt at cookies. "All right, sugar rush is served. They might taste like cardboard, but they'll keep your eyes open." Quibble picked up a mug and took a cautious sip. It was hot and bitter, but in that familiar way that made him feel almost human again. "Thanks, Fern. Just what I needed." "Don't mention it," she replied, her sarcasm softened by a rare hint of warmth. Crank was hunched over a console, brow furrowed in concentration as he tinkered with the paradox plans. "I think we've got enough changes queued up to make an impact," he said, looking up with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Let's fire them off then," Quibble said, cracking his knuckles. "Here's to screwing with the fabric of reality." With a series of keystrokes, Crank initiated the changes, each one a tiny pebble thrown into the vast ocean of time. They waited, breath held, as the ripples spread outward, their fate balanced on the edge of a knife. At first, nothing seemed different. The ship still creaked, the lights still flickered, and Quibble's stomach still made ominous noises. But slowly, subtly, the timeline began to shift. Flibber watched the console with hawk-like intensity. I think it's working. The timelines are stabilizing at least a little." Crank let out a laugh more relieved than triumphant. Who knew minor cultural tweaks could have such an impact? "Don't get cocky," Fern warned. "This might just be the calm before the storm." They all knew the risks. They were playing a dangerous game with forces beyond their comprehension. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a glimmer of hope, a chance to turn the tables on their scaly adversaries. Quibble leaned back in his chair, a genuine, albeit weary, smile on his face. "Looks like we might just pull this off." Of course, the universe, never one to let optimism go unpunished, chose that moment to remind them just how precarious their situation was. The ship shuddered violently, throwing them off balance. "Chronodiles aren't happy," Flibber said, gripping the console to steady himself. "I'm reading increased temporal activity. They are onto us." "Well, no time like the present," Quibble said, getting to his feet and grabbing the nearest intercom. "All hands brace for impact. Looks like we've pissed off the neighbors." The ship groaned again, this time with the distinct sound of metal protesting its treatment. The crew clung to whatever they could find, riding out the turbulence with the kind of stubbornness that had kept them alive so far. As the chaos raged around them, Quibble couldn't help but laugh. It was a bitter, wild sound, but it felt good, cathartic. "Captain's losing it," Crank said, though there was no judgment in his voice, just understanding. Fern rolled her eyes, though her smile betrayed her amusement. "What else is new?" Quibble managed to wrestle his laughter into submission, wiping a tear from his eye. "All right, team, back to work. We've still got a universe to save." With renewed determination, the crew returned to their stations, each one ready to face whatever fresh hell the Chronodiles threw their way. They were battered, exhausted, and running on caffeine and adrenaline, but they were still standing. And that was more than they could have hoped for. The ship steadied, the turbulence subsiding into a gentle rock as if it too was catching its breath. Flibber monitored the console, his expression unreadable. "Looks like we're holding," he said finally, his voice tinged with disbelief. "The changes we made, they're sticking." "Good," Quibble said, relief washing over him like a wave. "Let's keep it that way." Their victory was a fragile thing, held together by hope and sheer willpower. But for now, it was enough. They'd bought themselves time, and in this line of work, time was everything. As the crew settled back into their roles, Quibble took a moment to savor the win. They'd made it through another crisis, and though the future was uncertain, he had faith that they'd find a way to survive. They always did. "Think we'll ever get a break?" Crank asked, his voice filled with the kind of hope that only came from narrowly avoiding disaster. "Probably not," Quibble replied, a smile playing on his lips. "But then where's the fun in that?" Fern chuckled, raising her mug in a mock toast. "To more chaos and less sanity." The others joined in, their laughter echoing through the ship like a battle cry. They were far from out of the woods, but they were together, and for now, that was enough. As the stars danced outside the ship's windows, Quibble allowed himself a moment to dream. Perhaps one day they'd find a timeline where they could rest, where their troubles were nothing more than distant memories. But until then, they'd keep fighting, keep laughing, and keep surviving. Because that's what they did best. And in the grimdark universe they called home, that was worth more than all the multiverses combined. Captain Quibble squinted at the flickering lights and wondered if the ship would hold together long enough for them to actually pull off something resembling a miracle. "The temporal stabilizer, Mark," I hummed like a drunk hummingbird, seemingly content with its role in this cosmic drama. "Right, team," Quibble said, his voice barely carrying over the ambient symphony of creaks and groans issuing from their vessel. "We've got a timeline to bollocks up and some lizard brains to scramble." Crank, rubbing his temples like he was trying to squeeze a coherent thought from his mind, looked up and grinned. "I've queued up the paradoxes, Captain, ready to throw our little wrenches into their scaly works." Flibber tapped a button that made the console beep affirmatively, if such a thing could be said to exist. "We'll be sending reality on a lovely little holiday. Hope the Chronodiles packed their existential luggage." Quibble chuckled, though his heart wasn't quite in it yet. "Fern, make sure no one's going to pass out from low blood sugar. I need everyone sharp." "Or at least as sharp as usual," Fern muttered, passing around the remaining cookies, which had the consistency of cardboard and tasted like regret. "Try not to choke on these, or do. Might save us some air." They all took one, more out of solidarity than hunger. If they were going to face down the universe's most manipulative reptiles, they might as well do it with crumbs in their teeth. Crank clapped his hands together, his eyes gleaming with mad enthusiasm. "Let's give these time-traveling bastards a run for their money." "I'll start with the umbrella paradox and work my way up to socks before shoes." "Or shoes before pants," Flibber quipped. "That one's got a certain je ne sais quoi." Quibble raised an eyebrow. "Bit." "Exactly," Flibber replied, nodding sagely. The crew erupted into a flurry of activity. Crank's fingers danced across his console as he set the paradoxes in motion, each keystroke a potential death sentence or lifeline. Flibber monitored the timeline feedback, his eyes darting across the screen with the kind of intensity usually reserved for bomb disposal experts and hairstylists on prom night. "Chronodiles have started retaliating," Flibber announced, his voice steady enough to make liquid nitrogen jealous. "They're tweaking events again, but nothing we can't handle." Quibble leaned back, arms crossed, his brain working overtime to keep up with the temporal spaghetti they were creating. "Just keep pushing. We've got momentum. Let's see how their tech handles a good, old-fashioned human curveball." Fern, having taken up a position near the snack tray, raised her mug. "Here's to low expectations and high caffeine content." The others echoed her toast, their shared laughter a brief respite from the chaos of their reality-altering efforts. It was the kind of camaraderie forged in the fires of desperation, equal parts sincerity and sarcasm. As the minutes ticked by, the ship began to feel like it was holding its breath. the air thick with tension and the faint smell of burnt circuits. Outside, the stars continued their indifferent dance, oblivious to the drama playing out in their midst. "Status?" Quibble asked, his gaze fixed on Crank. "We're holding," Crank replied, though his tone suggested it was more wishful thinking than certainty. "The paradoxes are destabilizing their tech. With any luck, they'll implode under their own manipulations." "Luck," Flibber snorted. "Last time I checked, we were fresh out." "Then let's make our own," Quibble said, determination knitting his brows together like a particularly stubborn scarf. "Keep at it, everyone." The ship suddenly shuddered, a violent tremor that sent tools clattering to the floor and hearts into throats. Flibber's eyes widened as he scanned the readouts. "They're hitting back harder. Their tech is on the fritz, but they're not going down without a fight." "Typical," Quibble muttered. "Even when they are losing, they can't help but be a pain in our collective arse." Fern grabbed the intercom, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Attention, all hands. If you weren't already holding onto something, now would be a good time to start." The turbulence subsided, leaving the crew panting and wide-eyed, adrenaline coursing through their veins in place of the caffeine that had long since lost its edge. Crank grinned like a man who's just bluffed his way into a winning hand. "They're struggling, Captain. Their timeline's as stable as a one-legged chair on a roller coaster." Quibble allowed himself a rare moment of hope. "Then let's give it another nudge. Crank, focus on the big ones. If we can push them over the edge, they won't have the resources to counter." Crank nodded, his fingers flying over the keys with the precision of a master pianist, albeit one playing a symphony of chaos. "On it, Captain. Let's see how they like a little cosmic irony." As the crew worked, the tension in the room palpable and thick enough to cut with a spork, the ship's systems whirred and beeped in a cacophony that was almost musical in its discordance. "New status," Quibble demanded, his voice cutting through the din like a knife through particularly curdled butter. Flibber didn't look up from his console, his fingers tapping out a rhythm of controlled panic. "Looks like they're starting to collapse, Captain. Their timeline's fraying at the edges. If we keep this up, they'll be too busy untangling their mess to bother us." "Good," Quibble said, a feral grin spreading across his face. "Keep the pressure on. Let's make sure they regret ever poking their snouts into our timeline." The minutes dragged by, each second feeling like an eternity as they fought to maintain the upper hand. The ship groaned and shivered under the strain, but it held together, a testament to human ingenuity and an alarming disregard for safety standards. "Looks like we've got them on the ropes, Captain," Crank announced, his voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. "Their tech is failing faster than a politician's promises." Quibble nodded, his focus unwavering. "Keep hammering them. Let's make sure they don't get a chance to regroup." Fern tossed a broken cookie into her mouth, chewing with the kind of determination usually reserved for extreme sports. "So what's the plan when we win? Throw a party? Maybe invite a crocodile just for laughs?" Quibble snorted. "If they want to stick around for the celebration, they're welcome. I'll even let them do the washing up." As the crew worked tirelessly, the ship continued its valiant struggle against the onslaught of temporal flux. The hull vibrated like a gong struck by a particularly enthusiastic percussionist, and Quibble couldn't help but marvel at the vessel's resilience. "Captain, the crocodiles are losing their grip," Flibber said, his voice tinged with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. "Their timeline's collapsing faster than a cheap deck of cards in a wind tunnel." "Fantastic," Quibble replied, his grin positively predatory. "Let's make sure they don't get back up." The final push was a blur of frantic activity, each crew member driven by the adrenaline of impending victory. They were on the precipice of something monumental, and every second counted. Crank typed furiously, his concentration so intense it could have melted steel. "I'm triggering the last set of paradoxes now. If this doesn't do it, nothing will." They waited, breathless and tense, as the paradoxes rippled through the fabric of reality, their effects cascading outward in a dizzying array of possibilities. The ship shuddered one last time, as if it too was holding its breath, and then nothing. Silence descended like a thick, comforting blanket, the kind you found in the back of a closet and hugged to your chest on a cold night. "Well?" Quibble asked, his voice barely a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace. Flibber scanned the readouts, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We did it, Captain. Their timeline's gone critical. They are retreating." Quibble let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a laugh bubbling up from deep within his chest. "We did it, we bloody well did," Crank confirmed, his grin so wide it threatened to split his face in two. Fern raised her mug again, her voice jubilant. "To victory, even if it comes with a side of chaos." The crew's laughter filled the ship, a sound that echoed through the corridors and bounced off the bulkheads like a chorus of defiant angels. As they sat in the aftermath of their triumph, Quibble felt a rare flicker of contentment. They'd faced down the worst the universe could throw at them and come out on top. They'd proven once again that humanity might be flawed, reckless, and a little insane, but they were also resilient. "Think we'll get any time off now?" Crank asked, his tone half joking, half hopeful. "Probably not," Quibble replied, his grin as wide as the starscape outside. "But hey, at least we're not boring." Flibber chuckled, his relief evident. "Here's to more chaos, then." The others joined in, their laughter mingling with the hum of the ship's systems, a sound that spoke of camaraderie, survival, and the kind of joy that only comes from living on the edge. As the stars continued their eternal dance outside the ship's windows, Quibble leaned back and allowed himself a moment of peace. They'd won this round, and while the future was as uncertain as ever, he had faith that they'd face whatever came their way with the same irreverent determination that had carried them this far. "Right, team," he said, raising his mug in a final toast. "Here's to surviving the impossible. And maybe, just maybe, finding a little peace along the way." The others echoed his sentiments, their voices strong and defiant, underscoring the simple truth that no matter what the universe threw at them, they would endure. Because that's what they did best. The ship was finally still, its insides no longer vibrating like a cheap massage chair left on overdrive. Captain Quibble leaned back in his chair, the familiar groan of the old springs playing a symphony of triumph. Around him, the crew was trying to process the fact that they were still, inexplicably, alive. "So, what's next? A group hug?" Crank asked, feigning horror. "I draw the line at anything that involves public displays of affection." Quibble snorted, casting a glance around the mess hall that had somehow managed to stay intact through the metal-on-metal roller derby they just survived. "How about we start with a little less noise and a lot more dismantling of potentially apocalyptic artifacts?" Flibber was already at the console, fingers dancing over keys like a caffeinated spider on a hot plate. "I'll get on that, Captain. While I'm at it, maybe I'll uninstall future-ending catastrophe from our daily routine." Fern shoved a half-eaten protein bar back into her pocket. "I knew there was a reason I dragged myself out of bed for this." "The Chronodile artifact, then," Quibble said, nodding towards the control room. "Let's ensure they won't be messing with our timelines, or anyone else's, again." Crank gave a mock salute, swaggering over to the control room with the kind of bravado usually reserved for reality TV stars and people returning a faulty product with no receipt. Time to turn their fancy gizmo into interstellar scrap. The rest of the crew followed, their footsteps echoing in the corridors, a reminder of the ship's resilience. As they entered the control room, the Chronodile artifact sat there innocently enough, a relic of chaos wrapped in alien mystery. "All right, let's see what makes this tick," Crank said, circling it like a predator assessing its prey. "Any bets on it not being remotely explosive?" Quibble considered. "I'd put my money on it being as stable as a politician's moral compass, but hey, I could be wrong." Flibber eyed the artifact with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "Careful, Crank. If it starts ticking, run, preferably in the opposite direction. Doctor." Fern, leaning against the wall, added dryly, "And if you hear a voice saying self-destruct initiated, remember, Those aren't just empty threats. With a few deft motions, Crank began to dismantle the alien tech, their combined efforts a testament to human ingenuity and an alarming disregard for intergalactic safety regulations. The artifact whirred and clicked as it came apart, revealing a mess of circuits and components that looked more like a futuristic jigsaw puzzle than a world-ending device. Typical, Crank muttered, plucking out a particularly gnarly-looking wire. The cure for time-traveling reptile invasions is apparently a bit of manual labor. Quibble watched with a mix of pride and relief. Guess that makes us the universe's handymen. If all else fails, maybe we can start a repair business. As the last piece of the artifact clattered to the floor, there was a collective sigh of relief. The chronodile threat was neutralized, at least for now. No more dinosaurs unionizing, no more alternate timelines where Einstein became a world-class juggler instead of a physicist. Well, that's that, Flibber said, brushing his hands theatrically. Who's up for a celebratory snack? I've got some vintage rations that are only slightly past their expiration date. Fern perked up at the mention of food, following Flibber back to the mess hall like a loyal disciple in search of enlightenment. If vintage means less chewy than a rubber band, count me in. The crew reconvened in the mess hall, settling into their usual spots with the ease of people who had faced the impossible and come out on the other side. Quibble looked around at his team, the ragtag group of misfits who had somehow become family. "Here's to us," he said, raising his mug in a toast that echoed the earlier ones but carried the weight of victory. To surviving, thriving, and proving that humanity can still pull a win out of the cosmic ether. Their mugs clinked together, the sound a promise of more adventures, more challenges, and more irreverent shenanigans. It was a sound that said, quite simply, they were not done yet. Crank leaned back, a satisfied smirk stretching across his face. "Think the chronodiles will take the hint and leave us be?" Flibber shrugged, biting into a ration bar with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "They'd be smart to steer clear. We've got a decent track record of turning their plans to mush, Doctor." Fern, normally the voice of indifference, offered a rare smile. "And if they don't learn, well, we've got time." Literally, the ship's systems hummed contentedly in the background, a reminder that for all their flaws, humanity had its moments of brilliance. They'd faced a threat from outside time itself and had come out on top, a testament to stubbornness, cleverness, and no small amount of luck. "So," Crank said, breaking the comfortable silence, "what now, Captain? A bit of R&R, or do we keep poking the universe with a stick to see what else might bite?" Quibble considered, his gaze drifting to the stars beyond the ship's hull. "I think we've earned a break, but knowing us, we'll find another heap of trouble before long." Fern chuckled, leaning back in her chair with the relaxed air of someone who just escaped the jaws of a metaphorical crocodile. "Count me in. Just let me know when it's time to poke something with a stick again." As the laughter died down, the weight of their victory settled over the crew, a comfortable mantle that spoke of future possibilities and past glories. They'd taken on the universe and won, and now it was time to enjoy the fruits of their labor, at least until the next crisis reared its ugly head. Quibble rose, his mug raised in one final salute. "Here's to future adventures and the chaos we'll inevitably dive headfirst into. May our coffee be strong, our ship hold together, and our enemies be as thick as ever." The crew echoed his toast, their voices strong and defiant, underscoring the simple truth that no matter what the universe threw at them, they would endure. Because, after all, that's what they did best. With the chronodile artifact dismantled and their timeline restored, the crew of the ship prepared to face whatever came next. They were explorers, misfits, and survivors, a group of irreverent souls who had proven, once again, that humanity was more than a match for the universe's challenges. And as the stars continued their eternal dance outside the ship's windows, Captain Quibble and his crew settled in for the next chapter of their journey, ready to face whatever cosmic absurdity awaited them with a grin and a sarcastic quip. Because in the end, that's what made them human.